Right now, on Current News, Catholics targeted and police still looking for answers. A suicide bombing injures at least 20 outside of an Indonesian church holding services for Palm Sunday. Plus, the Diocese of Brooklyn begins Holy Week very differently than it did last year, with people in the pews. For many, it was their first time in church since last March.
I fear for my mom's safety. I fear for my father's safety.
Standing Up to Hate, a task force takes to the streets to fight violence against Asian Americans. And saying goodbye to the Catholic police officer killed during the mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado. Police in Indonesia are currently looking through surveillance videos like this one, searching for answers to the Holy Week bombing outside of a Catholic church. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. At this point, no organization has taken responsibility for the attack, but we are learning more about the bombers. At least 20 people leaving the cathedral in the city of Makassar were hurt, and Pope Francis is keeping them in his prayers.
Preghiamo per tutte le vittime della violenza, in particolare per quelle dell'attentato avvenuto questa mattina in Indonesia, davanti alla cattedrale di Makassar.
The pontiff remembering the churchgoers at the end of the Vatican's Palm Sunday Mass. Authorities are now investigating any ties between the bombers and radical networks, linking one of the militants to a 2019 suicide attack that killed 23 people at a cathedral in the Philippines. The Palm Sunday bombing is the most recent attack on Christians, a growing trend in the world's largest Muslim-majority country. A fireball and then smoke, the moment an explosive was detonated outside of the Sacred Heart of Jesus Cathedral in Makassar. Palm Sunday Mass had just ended, and as churchgoers were leaving, the blast went off. At least 20 people were wounded and taken to area hospitals. Police say the two suspected bombers who used a motorbike in the attack have died. They say they were newlyweds who were members of a pro-Islamic State extremist group. Security guards at the church say the man and woman first tried to enter the cathedral, and when they were turned away, they blew themselves up. 4 guards were among the injured. The president of the Muslim-majority nation, Joko Widodo, condemned Sunday's attack, saying terrorism is a crime against humanity and has nothing to do with any religious teachings. He went on to say, "I invite all members of society to jointly fight terrorism and radicalism, which are against our religious values and noble values as a nation that upholds divine values and upholds the values of diversity." So far, there has been no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. Christians are a minority in Indonesia, making up only 10% of the country's population. Unfortunately, Holy Week has become a prime target for anti-Christian violence worldwide. In 2019, the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka left 269 people dead and hundreds injured. In 2017, Coptic Christians in Egypt were forced to scale back Easter celebrations after 40 people died in 2 church bombings on Palm Sunday. And in 2016, a suicide bomber targeted Pakistan's Christian minority on Easter Sunday, killing 75 and injuring more than 300 people. We spoke to John Allen, the editor of Crux, about the dangers of Christian persecution during the holiest week in the Christian calendar. And he says the explosion in Indonesia probably won't cause much of a ripple in global interest.
That is, of course, tragic because it really ought to be exactly the opposite. The rest of the world ought to be looking at this, breathing a collective sigh of relief that this wasn't far worse than it was, and redoubling their efforts to provide security for Christians in other parts of the world as they gather throughout this week.
John Allen describes Sunday's attack as a wake-up call, one he hopes helps people better understand the perils Christians around the world can face when simply celebrating their faith. The Diocese of Brooklyn also marked the start of Holy Week, inching back to normal. For the first time since 2019, parishioners were back in the pews for Palm Sunday Mass. Emily Drewby was at St. James Cathedral in downtown Brooklyn, where parishioners were just grateful to be there.
For 43 years, Anna King has come to St. James Cathedral Basilica, but not for the past year.
We were all confined to our homes last year. This year, we're able to come out.
Now she's vaccinated and she's back.
And it feels good to get back to church.
Saying she couldn't miss another Palm Sunday after the pandemic made it impossible for her to attend last year. This is always a special day. It's the start of Holy Week, commemorating the triumphant arrival of Christ in Jerusalem days before he was crucified. But for parishioners like Anna, this year felt extra special. After nearly 2 years, they were allowed back in the pews as Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio celebrated Palm Sunday Mass.
Feels good that, we've been able to come back. It was a difficult year in all ways. Last Lent was kind of a virtual Lent. We couldn't participate in all the things that we normally do, so it was very different.
Last year's Holy Week fell just after New York City shut down to combat the pandemic. No palms, no procession.
And it was very sad. We just sat at home. It was just about the beginning of the pandemic. Last year was a little rough, a little sad, but like I said, we're making progress and it's getting better.
Parishioners were overjoyed to be back in church for Palm Sunday or Passion Sunday for the first time since 2019.
He sent 2 of his disciples and said to them,
"Go into this city, and a man will meet you carrying a jar of water."
To watch the Passion of the Lord read aloud and to hear a special message from Bishop DiMarzio as he delivered the homily.
We participate in the passion and death of Jesus by accepting in our own lives a portion of that suffering and death.
Not everything was the same. Just like last year, there was no procession this year too. But the beloved act of giving out the blessed palms did happen. With the return of handing out palms this Palm Sunday comes a return of hope among parishioners who, after an incredibly difficult year, are so grateful to finally be together again for this Holy Week. In downtown Brooklyn, Emily Drewby, Currents News.
All week, Net TV will have live coverage of Holy Week masses and services. Tuesday, right after Currents News at 7:30, the Chrism Mass will air right here on Net TV. Currents News will have full coverage of that service on Wednesday. And don't forget this, for more coverage of Holy Week events and to find services near you, head over to thetablet.org. Volunteers are taking to the streets to combat violence against Asian Americans. They're patrolling predominantly Asian communities, ready to step in and stop bias attacks. Emily Drewby went to Flushing to speak with one woman standing up to hate.
Keeping a watchful eye in Flushing, Queens. It's how Teresa Ting is fighting xenophobia, a fight she took on out of love.
I fear for my mom's safety. I fear for my father's safety. I tell her not to take the subway by herself.
In New York, the NYPD recorded 3 anti-Asian hate crimes in 2019. In 2020, that number spiked to 28 hate crimes committed against Asian people, including a new category for attacks motivated by the coronavirus. Between January 1st, 2021 and March 28th, there were 33. Teresa particularly rattled by an attack on an elderly Asian woman back in February.
It's just really sad that it's come to a time and place like this, and this is why we have to do something proactive.
So she did, starting Main Street Patrol, a group of volunteers who patrol in Flushing, Queens.
Basically, Main Street's the priority since it's the busiest.
Since it started in February, it's grown to 60 volunteers. They act as the eyes and ears of the community, filling a gap Teresa noticed watching video of attacks, bystanders not knowing how to safely interact.
We just focus on using these verbal de-escalation methods rather than physical intervention. I feel like, a lot of people or in general, like they're not aware of these methods. They're like, what do I do? I'm here. I don't want to get hurt.
Group members have had to intervene a few times already. They use ihollerback.org to train their volunteers, teaching them the 5 Ds of bystander intervention: distract or trying to draw attention away from the target, delegate or getting help from an authority figure, document, film it, delay, which is checking with the person who was harassed after the incident is over, and direct, which is speaking up if it seems safe.
So you can quickly flip up your phone to video.
Teresa even showed us a trick to safely document incidents. She's hoping in the future the group will continue to grow so they can expand from just the weekends. She's also hoping to teach the public these de-escalation methods. People helping people, creating a safe community for everyone, no matter what they look like. In Flushing, Queens, Emily Druby, Currents News.
The patrols come as another Asian woman was attacked in a New York City subway station. Police say in the latest attack, this man struck the woman in the face and shouted ethnic slurs at her Saturday night. He then ran out of the East 51st Street and Lexington Avenue subway station. Anyone with information is asked to contact the NYPD. As the trial for the man charged with George Floyd's murder begins, Floyd's family began their week in prayer.
And you don't know?
They prayed for justice for the 46-year-old father of 5 at a Minneapolis church. Opening statements began in the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin this morning. In an unprecedented decision, the judge has allowed the trial to be televised. A video of Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's body as he pleaded for air sparked widespread protests last summer. The trial is expected to last about 4 weeks. In Colorado, friends and family held a traditional Catholic funeral mass for police officer Eric Talley. He was killed in last week's mass shooting at a Boulder grocery store. Monday's mass was held at the Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Denver. We spoke with a close friend of Officer Talley's, Father Joseph Tran of St. Joseph Catholic Church, who remembers Talley as a man of faith and family. He leaves behind a wife and 7 children.
He loved his family, and the request that I heard very often when he asked me to pray for is, please, Father, pray for my family.
A public funeral will be held Tuesday morning at Flatirons Community Church in Lafayette, Colorado. Now to the COVID front. New York State is broadening vaccine eligibility, allowing adults 30 and older to make appointments beginning tomorrow. Governor Cuomo also saying New Yorkers 16 and older will be able to sign up for a shot next month. This comes as the Biden administration is working to develop a standard way of handling so-called vaccine passports. They would allow Americans to prove they are vaccinated as businesses try to reopen. The Washington Post reports they are expected to be free and available through smartphone apps with scannable codes. There's a lot more news headed your way. An ancestor of Princess Diana is on his way to sainthood. And high-risk outdoor sports are allowed to return to play next month. But what does that mean for scholarships?
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
The New York State Department of Health has finally given high-risk outdoor sports the go-ahead to begin facing off come April. But for many seniors in high school hoping to get athletic scholarships, their dreams are still sidelined. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has more from Sheepshead Bay.
Sports are what drive these students at St. Edmund Preparatory High School. The dream of a sports career in college and beyond has kept them moving forward. But over the last year, they've hit a wall.
That's kind of going down the drain.
In a 4-year period, nearly 20% of St. Edmund's students graduate with an athletic scholarship.
Eyes up.
Up until recently, senior Malik Cole thought he'd be one of them.
I was planning on, attending Duke, but I couldn't reach out because there's no film or no games to record or send them. So I had to try to figure out my family situation and financial stuff.
These students have had their athletic goals shattered. Now their finances are also at risk.
I was hoping to get athletic scholarships to help with that. And I also got some academic scholarships, but it just doesn't cover it enough.
The pandemic has forced the NCAA to cut, suspend, and even drop sports programs across the country, which means less athletic scholarships available to students.
It's just so upsetting that we can't even do anything to help ourselves get into a college for our athletic ability.
They wanted to live out their dreams, and because of the lack of play, they have nothing, and they can't afford to go to their dream schools.
Danielle Johnson, the assistant athletic director at St. Edmunds, says even if scholarships were available, her students would have nothing to show.
They want to see you in a game situation. They want to see you how you communicate with your teammates on the court. So the fact that we don't have any games, no tournaments, no nothing, I have nothing to show for that.
For Mia Miljanik, everything was riding on her plan to play volleyball in college.
I was hoping to go to Pace. That was my dream school since sophomore year.
And what about now?
I didn't even apply.
The Catholic High School Athletic Association started an online petition begging the Department of Health and City to let the kids play.
They're staying fit, they are in school, and now what reward are we giving them? Nothing.
The students say they'll continue to work hard and hold out hope of getting an athletic scholarship, even if it's a long shot. In Sheepshead Bay, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
As many of us can relate, the pandemic has been a source of stress in our lives, but coping with that stress has caused some to turn to drugs and alcohol. Father Cedric Pizenya says there is a solution. He joins us now to talk about his latest book on recovery and addictions. And Father, back in June of last year, the CDC said 13% of Americans reported starting or increasing substance use as a way of coping with stress or emotions related to COVID-19. There's even been a spike in online gambling in the past year. So what's the solution to this problem?
Well, the solution is spiritual, Christine. There is an epidemic going on in the midst of our pandemic, and people are turning to all kinds of substances. As you know, liquor stores were deemed essential businesses, and people are looking to escape. There's the quarantine fatigue, there's all kinds of reasons, but there is a solution, and the solution is spiritually based. And I base it on the 12-step program. Basically, you have to admit that you're powerless over your addiction. You have to believe that God has the power to help you. And then, of course, you surrender to the care of God. And then you change your habits, and it can happen with God's help. And I also want to say very quickly that you got to be motivated, because if you're not motivated, nothing's going to happen. And oftentimes what happens with an addiction is people go through a suffering of some sort. We can call it a bottoming out, remorse, guilt, whatever it is, or it could be an intervention from a family member that causes that person to want to change. So with motivation and then surrendering to God, you can experience not freedom, but recovery from addictions.
Now, you mentioned the solution being spiritual. A number of programs like Alcoholics Anonymous are faith-based or have a spiritual aspect. So why is faith so important to recovery, and how can people use that to strengthen their faith?
Because you need more than resolution to get into recovery. You really do need a revolution, and the revolution comes by God's power. That's the genius behind the 12-step program. Whether it's about alcoholism or drugs or pornography or gambling, as you said, you really do need divine help. And Bill Wilson, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, talks about an awakening. And the awakening comes, you could have a spiritual experience like a transfiguration experience, or simply realizing that God is giving your willpower new strength to be able to resist the addiction and come into recovery.
So you gave us some tips for people who are struggling with addictions. What about if we have loved ones struggling with addiction? What can we do to help?
Well, definitely you can pray for them. Also, you can talk with them. If it's the right moment, you have to be careful because they'll get defensive very quickly. That's why interventions are really risky, but they could do the trick. Intervention is when you get a couple people together that love you and you talk bluntly about your behavior, and those interventions can work. And as I said, if you're addicted, you've got to be motivated, and sometimes your loved ones talking to you is the motivation that you need to come into recovery. And also, you can give them my book or other books that are important regarding addictions. That could help that person too. So pray for them, talk with them, an intervention, give them a book. Yeah, all of the above.
All right, Father Cedric Pizenya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Christine. A joy to be with you.
And if you would like a copy of There Is a Solution, head on over to fathercedric.org. And you can watch Father Cedric every Sunday during Lent at 7:30 p.m. on Net TV and daily at 2:30 p.m. Still to come on Currents News, why the great-great-great-uncle of Princess Diana may become a saint for his work in the Catholic Church. And why these two men are singing inside an empty St. Peter's Basilica. A priest on the road to sainthood has ties to the British royal family. Pope Francis has declared Father Ignatius of St. Paul venerable. The priest, who lived in the early 1800s, is an ancestor of Princess Diana.
I'm immensely proud to be here in New York tonight with you all.
That was Princess Diana in 1995, presenting a fashion award in New York City. But the Princess of Wales was so much more than a style icon. She was a champion for the most vulnerable among us, something she has in common with her great-great-great-uncle, George Spencer, who's on the road to sainthood.
One thing that he thought was really important, and that in his opinion wasn't properly taken into account, was the tradition of the church.
George Spencer was born into a strictly Anglican family in 1799 who thought he would become a minister in the Anglican Church. But his passion for learning led him to study the writings of the early church fathers, and he turned his back on a life of immense wealth and comfort by converting to the Catholic faith. He was ordained a priest under the name of Father Ignatius of St. Paul and entered the Congregation of the Passion of Jesus Christ. Like his relative Princess Di, Spencer dedicated his ministry to the poor and marginalized. But not everyone accepted his conversion to Catholicism, and he suffered greatly. Still, he worked for unity between Catholics and Anglicans.
Father Spencer spent the rest of his life praying, promoting, and insisting on unity.
George Spencer died in 1864. His cause for beatification began shortly after, but was delayed by 2 world wars. One of the most challenging tasks for those following his cause has been deciphering his tiny handwriting, especially his diary.
Despite the obstacles his family presented, he never lost touch with any of them. He continued writing letters to his father until he died.
And soon, Ignatius of St. Paul may be as commonly known among Catholics as the People's Princess is to everyone. Ignatius of St. Paul's sainthood cause is still in its early stages. One miracle has to be attributed to Father Ignatius for him to be beatified, and another for him to be made a saint. And finally tonight, pilgrims at St. Peter's Basilica may not be able to attend Mass with the Pope this Holy Week, but they can share a divine experience from the comfort of their own home.
Die auf von der Sünde auf, richt nach oben deinen Lauf.
The German tenor duo called the opera singing inside an empty St. Peter's Basilica. This private performance will be broadcast throughout Europe during Holy Week. The concert features 18 pieces for the celebration of the Passion and Easter. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.